Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This is the third that we've had this year, and the topic today is how to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion in your recruitment and retention strategy. And we have with us today Mandy McIntyre and Ellen Thorpe. Ellen is the Executive Director of the National Women in Roofing Association. She provides leadership and advocacy work for other construction-related trade associations as well, and has grown the National Women in Roofing Association to 2,000 members, 40 sponsors, and has led programs that have engaged thousands of people. She has a bachelor's degree in political science, a master's degree in education policy, and has earned the rigorous Certified Association Executive designation. And Mandy McIntyre, Mandy is the owner of Level Up Consultants in Cleveland, Ohio. Mandy's business is based on the consultation of leadership and company culture initiatives to recruit, engage, and retain employees in the roofing industry. And she's completed Cornell University's Diversity and Inclusion Program and Harvard University's Leadership Principles Program, respectively. In 2022, she became a registered mental first aid instructor through the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. And she's a dedicated member of the National Women in Roofing with the DEI committee and serves as chair of the Cleveland Council. So welcome to Mandy and Ellen, both of you. Today, we're excited to have you to address the Women of Asphalt.
Well, thank you for having us. If my screen is futzing out a little bit, I think I have a short in my cord, so don't worry about it. We'll be flexible because that is what women do. We are flexible and we roll with it. We are so happy to be here with you today. You know, we really also have to acknowledge that Mandy and I do not have the lived experience of having suffered significantly as a result of injustice in our life. And so whenever you've got two white women talking about DEI, we want to make sure that we acknowledge that we have done the work to draw from a wide variety of resources on this issue. Most of what we are going to talk with you about today, or a good part of what we're going to talk with you about today, is based on research that we have done from people who have the lived experience. We also collaborated with some other National Women in Roofing members. Jennifer Stone, Jess Kress, and Ray July were really instrumental in the creation of this content. We also worked with educational and DEI consultant, Rhonda Payne with Flock Theory. And so we also want to acknowledge her work in bringing this to light as well. This presentation is going to cover, you know, the traditional ideas about diversity and the benefits of inclusion, but we're also going to talk a little bit about the meaning of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But since we also want to be forward thinkers, we'd like to go beyond what everyone else is saying about diversity. We will go beyond the status quo and talk about how the asphalt industry can actually improve their company culture and employee recruitment and retention through a DEI program. And then finally, we're also going to give you a snapshot view of a new initiative in the construction and contracting industries called Real Roofing. Real Roofing was created for the roofing industry, but it is applicable to infrastructure, construction, and contracting industries as well. The examples that we use will be about diversity among race, culture, gender, and age, as well as diversity among sexual orientation and gender identification and presentation.
Ellen, I just want to note one thing before you continue. If anyone has questions, we're going to ask that you put them into the chat and we'll address them at the end of the presentation rather than during. That's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, put those questions in the chat. So, Arpina, are you seeing my full screen or are you seeing my notes screen?
I see your presentation screen.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And forget what I said before. Okay, so traditional thoughts on the business case for diversity. The business case for diversity is very much a phrase from the 80s and 90s. We use it here tongue in cheek, sort of facetiously, but we also use it because for some people, that's where they're starting from. And that has been very important to the committee that put together Real Roofing is, everybody is starting from a different place. And, some of us are in a place of really acknowledging our privilege. And so we know that we need to do the work to educate ourselves. And some of us are in a place where we don't understand what the big deal is. And we don't want to make anybody feel bad about where they're coming from or where they're starting from. What's important is that we're having the conversation. And so in this presentation, I might say something wrong and correct myself, and that's okay. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time about the traditional thoughts about the business case for diversity, because this type of thinking, as I mentioned, has been in the news and the popular media since the 1980s. If you'd like to dig deeper, we have over 50 vetted articles that are listed on the Real Roofing website. So first of all, research shows that a thoughtful and practical cultural shift toward diversity and inclusion can really drive bottom line profit by sparking innovation, increasing productivity, reducing turnover, improving safety, and enhancing your reputation. All of these things are going to lead towards giving your company an edge over competitors who are still doing things in that stale and predictable way. Second, other research indicates the diverse companies are able to perform better because they are able to understand different perspectives, tap into different markets, and make better decisions that accurately reflect the society that we live in. And of course, attaining such results won't happen overnight. A successful diversity and inclusion program takes time to implement. And there's far more to that than merely just hiring people based on the numbers from diverse backgrounds and genders. For example, some women in the roofing industry report that there seems to be more general comfort around issues of having people who are gay in the workplace, and that certainly hasn't happened quickly. In addition, it's not just about numbers. We aren't in 1985 anymore with affirmative action quotas. Hiring goals may boost diversity numbers, but this won't automatically create a culture that's inclusive of other people. Too often, leaders focus on diversity and describe people as being diverse, and inclusion efforts disproportionately focus on employee pipeline. But the employee experience continues far beyond an offer letter. To retain and nurture top talent, it's critical to take an honest look at the end-to-end employee experience with an eye toward creating conditions that promote inclusion on a daily basis and also designing ways to measure that impact. You can't just do it. You have to measure it and make sure that you're doing what you think you are. Because a diversity and inclusivity program requires a commitment of time, energy, and resources by an employer, one may have to prove or at least want to know that its results will be worth the investment. We'll talk more about this later, but a good example of a return on investment is labor and recruitment and gaining and keeping employees. And finally, even when they are diverse, companies will have to go far beyond superficial aspects of diversity and inclusion and be mindful of other less clear-cut or precise factors, such as an atmosphere of inclusion. And that's the hard work to do. It's easy to do the superficial things. It's harder to do the things that really matter. So you'll notice that our previous couple minutes talked a lot about the D, which is diversity, and the I, which is inclusion. And most modern discussions around this topic also include an E, which is equity. But the traditionally focused literature on diversity doesn't often include a discussion of equity. And so Mandy is going to chat a little bit more about this.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. So just to kind of clarify exactly what DEI means before I get into equity. So diversity, I think a lot of people just, when you hear diversity, you equate that to what you can see. So diversity of what's the most obvious thing you see in groups of people, diversity of race, diversity of gender. But it really goes beyond that. You could have diversity of age, diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, of culture, of just different lived experience. So I guess I just want to put out there that it's not so, quite literally, it's not so black and white when you think of diversity. It really goes beyond that. And inclusion is really, it's an action. So when you're talking about DEI, diversity is what you're seeing. Inclusion is the action to keep those diverse groups of people feel like there's a sense of belonging. They have a seat at the table. They have, their voice matters. And then when you go into equity, that's where I think people have the hardest time understanding what exactly is equity. Because everyone hears, women's equality, gender equality, racial equality, and that's great. Yeah, in a lot of instances, there is that need for equality. But what equity does is it actually takes it a step further, and it provides fair access and opportunity, as opposed to equal access and opportunity. And if we go to the next slide, please, Ellen. This will kind of, a visual is much easier to understand when it comes to equity, I feel like. So, oh, it just blanked out. Okay, there we go.
It'll come back.
Okay, so equality, so think of a racetrack, okay? If you put everybody at the same starting point for a race, that it's not fair. It's not fair access and opportunity. That's why you have that staggered start. So you have to think about that in terms of people too. There's another illustration we have on the next slide. So that has another great illustration. So think of a bike, okay? If you have 4 different people, 4 different walks of life, one person who's in a wheel, if you give the same bike to every person, yeah, it's an equal bike, but it's not equitable because it's not fair opportunity and access to ride that bike. So the person in the wheelchair needs a separate bike. A person who, is too tall needs a different bike. A child needs a child's bike. So how this comes into play with your workforce is, an example that I can use is when I worked for a roofing contractor, and we had an employee who was going through recovery, and he was going to a methadone clinic, and he was late every day. And the company had a very strict start time at 7:30. Everyone has to be there, and he was late. And I was like, you're going to get fired if you don't start showing up on time. Like, what's going on? Why can't you get here? And it took him a while, but then he finally told me why he's late, because he's standing in line to get his medication that he needs every day before coming to work. So that person ended up getting a flexible start time, again, to grant him fair opportunity and access to work. So equity, I think, is the most difficult to understand, but it's actually it's easy to apply. What is going to make each person their best possible engaged self at your business? For a working mother, that may mean she needs to she needs some flex time. For a working father too, who only gets their children maybe 1 day a week, and they want to pick up their child at school on that one day that they get to have them. So it's very applicable. And I feel like that's like one of the easiest things you can start doing is putting equity into place.
So speaking of things that you can start doing, there's a lot of articles out there about how to implement a successful diversity and inclusion initiative in the workplace. But what are you actually supposed to do? What are the action items? What have other companies done? What have other companies done? There are several recurring themes and ideas that came out when we did the research to create this program. I want to acknowledge again that Mandy and I do not have the lived experience of often needing to benefit from DEI programs. Certainly as women, we have some of that. But we approached this presentation and this program by doing like graduate PhD level research on this topic. Mandy has taken courses to learn from other people who have done the original research and the lived experience. I did probably almost 100 hours of research and writing to learn from other people and their lived experience. We are going to be careful to differentiate as we go through this between what the research shows and what is the anecdotal information that we are providing from companies in the roofing industry. A couple years ago, I did some work with the asphalt industry, and the parallels between the asphalt industry and the roofing industry are significant. Male-dominated, skilled trades, manual labor, family-owned companies, outside working conditions, seasonal working conditions, and probably the most exciting thing is family-owned companies where women either have taken over or are, and where young women are in the process of taking over these companies. So I think you'll see a lot of the parallels as well. So we're going to go through some of the recommendations that we found in our research on the topic, and also share what some of the National Women in Roofing member companies are doing at the same time. So number one, all of this leads to recruitment and retention. Mandy uses the phrase company culture. Everything that you're doing around DEI and a sense of belonging is going to lead to the retention of your current employees and to the recruitment of new employees. And the best way to gain commitment to diversity initiatives is to make it an organizational goal and to include it in the performance metrics. You want to get your leaders involved. Creating an inclusive organization must be a priority for the organization's top leadership. Consensus has to be built through open conversation, understanding the benefits of inclusion, and connecting diversity and inclusion with the business strategy. Once the top leadership has consensus, then middle managers must be involved and equipped to participate as well. Mandy?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times when we're talking about DEI, it's usually coming from, just for lack of a better phrase, just like a regular employee in the business. It's not always coming from that initial spark, that initial conversation that is happening, is not always coming from upper management, leadership, owners of businesses. So anyone watching this webinar today, one of the best ways to get buy-in from leadership is to spin this DEI as a recruiting tool. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that it does work. When I was working with a roofing contractor, I made a DEI statement. That alone on your website, when you have that linked to Indeed, job applications and whatnot, that automatically gives every person that's looking up your business, whether they read it or not, to see that you have a DEI statement goes so far. and then changing verbiage on your ads for, instead of saying like now hiring, everyone says now hiring. You could say like welcoming new team members. That just sounds more inviting and more inclusive. Change some phrases where we welcome all walks of life. Make sure you put your like equal opportunity, second chance employer. That is key. People that have gone through, that have been to prison or gone through the system, having a second chance employer is key. But when you present to your leadership team that, and we have all these references for the actual stats and figures, and I have a couple here that I can share, but when everyone's exhausted as to what do we do to get employees, you change your culture. You change whatever you're doing. If that's not working, what's the definition of insanity? To keep doing the same thing. So we need to change it up. And so you're changing it up, but you're also making your company a better place to be. And you're just kind of keeping up with the times. I think construction, roofing, asphalt, you know, I think that there's still like an old school way of thinking, like the old white male boys club, so to speak. And there's a different train of thought with that, because they have never had to experience or go through hardships that women have had to go through, hardships that people of color that had to go through. But if you spin it as a recruiting tool, I know when I started making these changes, we increased our recruiting efforts 3 times over. I was able to get 3 times the amount of employees in 1 year compared to the previous year when I didn't do any DEI initiatives. There is an article from Forbes that says 87% of the time diverse teams have better results. From Indeed, 55% of job seekers say it's extremely important to work at a company that prioritizes diversity and inclusion. So you're going to have a better company, you're going to have a better culture, and you're definitely going to be able to recruit more people.
So from the research, we know that successful diversity practitioners offer leadership, influence, collaboration, strategy, and strong communication skills, in addition to having an excellent command of diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism. If you don't already have a subject matter within your company managing your diversity and inclusion program, it's time to hire one. Or at least it's time to hire a contractor that can help your company. And by contractor, I mean like a part-time contractor consultant. Such a move also shows that management is serious about D&I. I mean, we're all so tired of like, you know, the 3 or 4 sentence paragraph that says that the company is committed to D&I, but it doesn't actually do anything. And that's one of the reasons that we created Real Roofing. In the roofing industry, you know, we've got sort of like 3 different categories of companies, right? We've got the gigantic, you know, national company that owns a ton of subsidiaries in 30 states. Then we've got like mid-sized contractors that do a lot of commercial work, like in a given geographic area, like the Nashville area or the Denver area. And then we've got small contractors that do mostly residential work and in a really hyper local area. And many of these mid-size and small contractors can't afford to hire an expert. And Real Roofing, you know, is not, it can't give you all the answers, but it is at least a great place to get the conversation started. And that's what we want to do. We just have to get this conversation started. Mandy?
Mm-hmm. So when we were first putting this together, one of the DEI committee members, or chair actually, Ray July, is a Black woman. And at her company, she had shared with us that she was the first Black woman to ever work there. And how being a woman of color and moving her way up the leadership ladder, she was then able to bring about all of her lived experience, which is when you have someone that is not the majority. You are getting an entirely new outlook on things. You are getting an entirely new thought process. And what this helps with too is that aside from recruiting, you have to think also in terms of your customers, okay? Not every customer is the majority race and majority narrative. So when you have people, diverse people that are on your leadership team, you're not also helping to get more diverse talent for your business, but you're also then reflecting and getting and appealing to more diverse customers, because there are plenty of customers out there that don't look like you. And are you appealing to them? So it's an untapped, not only labor market, but it's also an untapped customer market as well. So again, this is coming, I'm speaking on Ray's behalf with her experience. And I think she's been there 7 years, and this is at Chinook Roofing in Washington State. And she had said that during meetings, there's always fresh ideas. She's been able to recruit other diverse team members. And it's been, she's been a real change agent. And we need more of that within not only the roofing industry, but just in construction in general.
Oh yeah, that is for sure.
Yeah.
You know, it's really critical to measure diversity. Oh, hold on, that didn't advance. There. It's really critical to measure diversity and inclusion in all talent practices, but we want to be especially aware of conscious and unconscious biases, as they generally seem to be the most glaring throughout the recruiting process. Mandy?
Mm-hmm. So unconscious bias, everybody has it, okay? Everybody has it. It's impossible not to have it. It's ingrained in us. It's, you know, it's a survival mechanism. Our minds are trained to automatically process and assess everything that comes in front of our eyes. Then you have media, society, different institutions that have systemically oppressed certain races, genders, ethnicities, religions. So when we say recruit without bias, it's if you get a job application in front of you and the name is, let's see, not an Anglo-Saxon name. Say the name is Malika Jones, okay? When you hear that, I'm sure you already have an idea in your mind of what Malika Jones looks like. What you have to do is make sure that you are not putting any type of stereotype in your mind, and you're not making any assumptions about that person based on their name. And it's important to note, again, you cannot not have unconscious bias. We all have it. It's breaking through and acknowledging, okay, I have to make sure that I am looking at this, removing my bias and giving every single person in front of me the same amount of attention and respect. Ellen?
Yes. We also want to make sure that we touch on training. So without a doubt, training is the most popular solution to foster diversity and inclusion. Something like this is even considered a training. And in fact, almost all of the Fortune 500 companies and at least a half of all US mid-sized companies mandate some type of diversity training. You have to start somewhere. Training helps raise awareness, uproot bias, and create a common language to facilitate diversity and inclusion discussions. I think we all know, or at least many of us have the feeling of wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be aware of the right thing, and wanting to communicate that in a way that is appropriate and effective. And so doing some training within your companies around DEI issues, it starts everybody off with a base level of knowledge and understanding. And that is also one of the reasons that we created Real Roofing. We wanted to have a basic area for everybody to start from. Mandy?
So I think one thing I want to really highlight here is that it's not like an all or nothing approach.
Yeah.
And it's not one size fits all approach either. You have to meet everybody where they're at. Okay. So with this, it may just be you have a workshop on just what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have a lunch and learn. Maybe you all watch a video explanation about something. Because sometimes people's reaction is they feel a sense of being threatened. A lot of when people hear certain times when people hear diversity, equity, inclusion, there's this immediate like tenseness that comes across. So I always like to say it's an invitation. It's not a challenge. We're inviting everyone to the table. It doesn't have to be so controversial. It's just normal conversation. And so another good way to kind of introduce this is to just start talking about different holidays, like talk about Juneteenth, talk about Pride Month. Rosh Hashanah was yesterday. Talk about those different things. And you just can slowly start having those conversations. I know like this Friday, I'm going to be at a roofing company in Columbus, Ohio, and they are nowhere near a full training program, but they want to do a workshop. They want to have a conversation. Great starting point. Ellen?
Yeah. So what we know from the research and the articles on this topic is that voluntary employee-led groups with shared characteristics or life experiences are generally called employee resource groups or affinity groups in many companies. And they often come up with really clever names that sort of indicate the shared identity or the shared characteristic that the groups have. These are useful for many companies. They provide a protected environment to have an open dialogue with coworkers who have an identity, a shared identity or characteristic. And they provide a really helpful source to hear from a diverse group set. So one of the major manufacturers in the roofing industry has an employee resource group for all employees that are LGBTQIA+. And this resource group meets with each other just to provide general support among having that shared characteristic. They do community service projects, and they also, and very importantly, provide feedback to the upper management and C-suite about their experiences as someone who identifies as part of the LGBTQIA+ community and what it's like to live and work in that area. Mandy?
So an important thing I feel like I keep every time I start talking, like an important thing to remember. But I'm always like, wait, there's one, if you're going to get one little snippet from me for this section, here's what it is. So, okay. We shouldn't expect employees to have to make these groups for themselves. We shouldn't expect that employees have to feel like they have to fight for it. Okay. So when I was working for a roofing contractor, I noticed that because of all my DEI efforts, before we did not have any Black employees. And all of a sudden we had a lot of Black employees. So I said, we should make an ERG, an employee resource group. So we started Minority Occupational Recruitment and Education. And the purpose of that was for our Black employees to have a group, a resource for us. We met once a month to learn from each other and to also help our recruitment efforts, because who better to help with recruiting diverse groups than the diverse groups themselves? So what they would do is whenever we had a Black candidate come in for an interview, we had an ambassador that would be there so that someone of color coming in didn't feel like they were walking into this homogeneous space where it's just a bunch of white people sitting around a table. And the same for women too. Whenever we had women candidates, I made sure myself or another woman within the company was there. And why this is important is because when people feel like someone else is there like them, it's just less intimidating and less threatening, and you're going to get more out of that person. Whereas if you don't, you may miss out on a great candidate because they didn't feel comfortable enough showing their true selves, if that makes sense. So ERGs, employee resource groups, are so vital and important for engagement and also for recruitment.
You know,
Ellen?
I haven't looked at the chat, but just in case any of you are wondering, like, geez, like they're talking a lot about race. Yeah, we are. We are, because we're not getting anywhere by pretending that color doesn't exist, or that we don't see color, or that it doesn't matter. We're not getting anywhere with that. And instead, what we need to do is acknowledge that some people in our society have more privilege, and some people in our society have more oppression than others. And, I wish so much that it was just as simple as like everyone being nice to everyone, or everyone treating everyone with respect. And certainly that's part of it, but none of being nice to everyone or treating everyone with respect doesn't address the real systemic and underlying issues. And that's what we want to do. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I definitely recall that time of, I don't see color. I just treat everyone as I want to be
same.
treated. Yeah. And I wish it were that easy. It's not. And so what we want to do is we want to do the hard work and have the hard conversations so that we can actually make a difference. So just in case you're feeling like, geez, like, does everything have to be about, race, class, and gender? No, not everything. Like, you can eat a cupcake and not think about that. But for a lot of people in our society and in our workplaces, especially if they are people of color, or if they are LGBTQIA+, or part of any group that has been underrepresented or marginalized, they're already thinking about it all the time anyway. And so what we're doing is we're acknowledging that, and we're trying to create a more equitable and inclusive atmosphere.
Ellen, that was beautifully said. And here's the thing too, what the whole I don't see color, that it is an antiquated term. It's important to see color because you do. We all see color. We see it. When we say that it's important to acknowledge somebody's race and someone's identity, is because you are then acknowledging that culture, that lived experience. You are acknowledging that person as a whole. And that's where inclusion and belonging comes from. Mm-hmm. If you say, oh, I don't see color, everyone's the same. Everyone's not the same. They're just not. And those lived experiences, that is what makes somebody who they are. And so I think a lot of people are afraid to say the word Black person or gay person or queer person or what, and it's okay to say those words, and even if you do say something and maybe you shouldn't have said it, I make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes down a DEI road. It's bumpy. You might fall off, but you just dust yourself off and get back on.
Yeah. And you just want to keep talking about it with your employees. You want to communicate a lot. You want to explain the process every step of the way. And the research is really clear to over communicate on this issue. You want to explain the process, manage expectations and help employees understand how they can participate. Over communicating also helps ensure that workplace policies include language around the importance of creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. Mandy?
Yes, so I wanted to share a story that Ray July had submitted. And so in her area of the country, it's a big Hispanic workforce. So what they would do to communicate and get involved is they would do community events like sponsoring a rodeo. And they would show and communicate these special events for this group, their Hispanic workforce, to their entire company to share that experience and share that culture. So, you know, communication can look a lot of ways. It can be talking about the DEI initiative itself, but it's also talking about and celebrating different cultures, different ethnicities, different races, and having that be considered normal to talk about.
Our companies need to walk the talk.
Oh.
We need to walk the talk. After George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020, DEI seemed to become more of a fad and not a lot of action. So many companies published paragraphs or statements that spoke out against racism and police brutality. Promises were made to invest in fighting racial equality, supporting minority-owned businesses, lobbying for reform, and to provide more opportunities to Black Americans within these companies. We are so proud that National Women in Roofing is going beyond issuing a statement, and we're actually doing something. And we encourage your companies to do the same. Actually do something. Mandy?
Thank you. So with walking the talk, it's an ongoing process. It's always evolving. Like right now, I've seen DEI and B start to be referenced, B for belonging. It's something that you have to continue to work on, and you have to continue to learn. You have to continue to be open-minded, and you have to continue to do and take action, do the work. A really great way to continue the conversation is to do what I like to call quarterly climate checks. And it's just a quarterly survey from employees. You could ask different questions, see what they're feeling, see what they're sensing, see where they're at within the DEI journey of your particular company, so that you always get an ongoing pulse of what people are thinking. Is there some resistance? Do they want more? Are there questions? Get the feedback and continue taking action.
Thank you,
Ellen?
Mandy. I have to confess, I did a quick little scroll through the participants, and I see some roofing names on those among the participants. So I just had the bright idea to try to get some of these roofing women and asphalt women together at some point, because I think we have a lot to learn from each other. So thank you to the roofing people who joined us. So we've gone over a lot of info. You know, I still get a little nervous talking about this because I want to make sure everybody understands, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. But again, all of this information is on the Real Roofing website at realroofing.org if you want to review or do a deeper dive. And I will also put the slides up there as well on realroofing.org in case you want to take some of them back. And there's like a million articles there as well. Oh, and that's a picture of our realroofing.org website. And there's a picture of Jess and Ray on the right-hand side, who are two of the people that helped us create this content in this program. I want to, again, going back to the research and sort of like the academic factual information, I also want to give credit to the Center for Creative Leadership. Real Roofing is inspired by a global leadership nonprofit organization called the Center for Creative Leadership. Their proprietary Real framework for equity, diversity, and inclusion is informed by decades of making the world a better place through more effective leadership. The R stands for Reveal Opportunities, the E for Elevate Equity, the A for Activate Diversity, and the L for Lead Inclusively. Mandy?
Oh, yes, sorry. Forgot my cue. Okay, Real Roofing. Yes, so this is our education program. It's 19, they're really micro lessons. They're about 15 to 20 minutes each. It comes on your phone through text. You can look at it on a website too, but it's mobile accessible. There's no password to remember. You get a text message with the day's lesson. There's a range of topics that we discuss, everything. We dive into unconscious bias. We talk about sexism. We talk about racism. We talk about intersectionality. It's cohort-based, meaning it's groups of people at a time. And you can also, it's a good price point. It's an affordable price point. And there are also opportunities to do group sessions as well for your business or organization.
When we created this program, Rhonda at Flock Theory, as I mentioned, was our consultant in creating this. She is an expert on adult education, diversity education, and association education. And we all agreed that one of the most important things is that nobody needed to remember an additional password to be able to access the program. So I am not a huge texting person, but it is really nice that you get a text message the mornings that there's new content, and you click on it, and there's your 15 to 20 minute little video and lesson for the day. This program is priced at $399. For some people, that's like, oh my God, that's so crazy. For other people, they think it's such a bargain. And there's more information about that on our website.
And one more thing, it's self-paced. So yeah. you get 3 lessons a week, but it's not like you have to do the lesson each day. Ideally, would you do it? Yes. But I know even the first time that I went around, there was like a week where I had to do all of them in one day because it was just like a crazy work week. So it is self-paced, which is really nice too.
Yes. So that is it for our presentation. It looks like we've got some time for questions and discussion.
Yeah, Ellen, so there was a question put on here. There's several good questions, and we'll try to get to them along with anything that anyone wants to open up to ask. But the one that I think a lot of people are probably wondering about as you're speaking would be, how do you handle conversations when other employees come and say it's not fair that you're making exceptions for a person based on their personal life or circumstances when it's not granted to everyone else? So the equity piece that you were addressing there, what recommendations would you give?
You know, I'm going to defer to Mandy on that, because my answer would be like, yeah, you're right, life isn't fair. So Mandy, what would you recommend towards companies, and maybe reflect a little bit on your own experience when you were with the roofing contractor about, you know, the single dad who has his kids one day a week and wants to pick them up from school? What do you do when you make that accommodation for him, but other people say it's not fair because everybody has extenuating personal life circumstances?
Yeah, so I did get questions like that. And there was a couple people who, very by the book type of people who were like, why does he get special treatment, or why, whatever it may be. And really to that, I would say, because I want him to be part of this team. And that's the only way he can be part of this team, is if he gets a flexible start time because he's got to go get his medication. Or if it was because I remember there was one guy who had his daughter only one day a week and he'd like to pick her up from school. So I would always make sure he'd be able to get out in time for that. Someone said something once, and I said, my answer was simply, I want him to see his kid. I want him to see his kid. That's important to me. So I made that decision. There's going to be a time where something is important to you and you're going to need some flexibility. And if you ask for something like that, you're probably going to get it. So maybe you're not getting something now, but I mean, come on. At every point in time, someone, even if it's just asking for a day off, you know what I mean? Everybody needs something at some point. It's just not all going to look the same, and it's not all going to happen at the same time.
Very good. Okay, here's another. Do you have advice for how an employee who would like to see more movement on DEI in their workplace, and how they can safely bring it up with their supervisors and companies?
Yeah. So it's funny. So one of the things on our wish list is a justification toolkit. So
I'm working on that.
It's on our wish list. I think it'll be finished in a couple months. And what we're intending to do is to provide, and this will be free on our website. We want to provide the language, the text that an employee can bring this up. I think it's always good to start in terms of company culture and employee recruitment and retention. And also you can use that old-fashioned phrase, the business case for diversity. Everyone is starting at different places. And I think that if you focus it from the perspective of this is what's better for the company, this is what's better for business, this is what's better for employee recruitment and retention, I think that you're going to have more luck starting from that place. One of the phrases I like to say when I'm feeling snarky is that, it's not 1975 anymore. Like, in 1975, unemployment was really high, and there was this sentiment among, managers of, well, that person just better be glad to have a job. And that's just not where we are anymore. Unemployment is at an all-time low. The entire, skilled trades, construction, contracting industries have labor problems or labor challenges. And so I think approaching it from a perspective of what is best for a company is going to be your best bet. And we should have that justification kit ready on our website within the next couple months. And I'll share that information with our PINA so that you all can have access to that as well.
Yeah, tie anything to the labor shortage and give a different, and you'll get people to at least be open to the idea that you wouldn't think would be, because everyone's desperate. Everyone is desperate. So if you can get a better company culture, get some people to change their perspective and get more employees, I mean, what more could you ask for?
Yeah. And that's another area of similarity between roofing and asphalt industries, is that there is no amount of technology that we can develop in our products, in our machinery, in our equipment that is going to eliminate the need for humans to run them. We are always going to need labor, and we're always going to need skilled and trained labor.
Okay, this is similar, but how would a non-manager employee start one of the, we're phrasing it here, minority welcome groups within their organization in a way that gathers managers and or C-suite support? So those ERGs that we were talking about.
I think one approach is to bring it to them directly. I think the other approach, and this is like pretty traditional in like the leadership research and literature, is to find a champion. So I've seen on some of the Women of Asphalt agendas, and we certainly have them in Women in Roofing agendas as well, is, you know, sessions on developing allies and champions. It often is someone who is a little bit more progressive or forward thinking. And so find that champion and bring your idea to that person first to get it vetted. That's what I would suggest. What do you think, Mandy?
No, I think that's actually the perfect answer, because you have to make sure that it's somebody that's going to agree with you. One time I had mentioned, this was before National Women in Roofing, I had mentioned, oh, we should have a women's group here at this. And I was told their tits deal with it. So clearly I didn't go to the right person. But before I got involved with National Women in Roofing, I went to my manager and I was like, this sounds really great. I want to join. He's like, that'd be great for you. So yeah, find your ally.
That's great advice. We do talk about that at Women of Asphalt. And I think some of our male allies may be on here as well, because I did see a few names.
It speaks
Kim,
volumes.
Yeah, it does. We appreciate them. Kim McDonald has submitted a few questions, and Kim, we're getting short on time, so I thought I'd let you pick. And Kim has been one of our speakers in the past. I think a lot of you will recognize her. Would you like to pick which question we go to next in case it's our last question?
Sure. Do you mean Ellen and Mandy or me?
Or you submitted some, and I was going to read one, but I wanted to pick the right one.
Sure. Let me just remind myself, Sheila, what I yeah,
typing away.
hello, just come to my house. We'll talk. Well, yeah, I could just talk forever. Thank you both very much. You really were very eloquent in sharing some of these and the real lives, I think, lived, and how difficult it is to have these conversations, because,
yeah,
you know, what appears to be common sense and the natural evolution of things to many people, for other people, they're at a different place. And you really, I think, answered that quite well. So that was really good to hear. It is a struggle with all of these change questions. So this is another change. And right now we are in a place where there's so much change happening. So I'm wondering just your experience on how people would see this. And I guess it's not really there, Sheila, maybe it's a little bit of a swerve, but it's how people are managing all the other change, and if this kind of conversation would be in that whole realm of change, or if the people you're talking to actually sees it very distinctly, or do they see culture shifting? And this is another aspect of culture shifting.
Yes. I was at, that really resonates with me, Kim. I was at a roofing convention the past couple days in Las Vegas. And one of the owners of a roofing company in the Midwest that is rapidly growing, he is sort of a forward thinker. We were talking about the changes that are coming in the roofing industry. And I don't know if you're seeing this in asphalt as well, but basically what we're seeing is that we're seeing a real bifurcation in the types of companies. So you've got all these, I talked before about sort of the 3 different categories or tiers of roofing companies. And what we're seeing is like venture capitalists coming in and investing in roofing companies. And we're also seeing a lot of mid-sized companies being bought up by larger companies. When you increase the corporate structure and corporate governance, and you're changing a company from 3 or 4 employees and a bunch of 1099s into a company that is now owned, that is operated by the family, but owned by this other company, there's going to be a tremendous difference there. And we do see that while there certainly are some unfortunate circumstances that are going to occur as a result of that change, I think the benefit of it is that we are definitely seeing more emphasis on transparency and structure among finances, safety, and DEI initiatives as well. And I'll say again, you know, it's not 1975 anymore. The progressive, forward-thinking business owners definitely see this as important.
So thank you very much. It's 4:01, so be mindful of everyone's time, and you probably all have 4:00 meetings, or at least that's East Coast time. It's earlier on the
Yes.
West Coast. And so we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to thank you, Ellen and Mandy, for a great presentation. I know when we talked about this in advance, we were talking about simple things like providing women with a toilet on a project, which was a big deal. But this is so much more than that. And just appreciate all that you've addressed here today, and for sharing your website and your product with us as well. So thank you.
Thank
And thank you
you.
everyone for
Thank you
joining.
for the opportunity. Bye, everybody.